This is Just Listen, hosted by George. Today is March 9th, 2026. Today, I want to talk about the U.S. federal government policy on gas prices. And I want to lead with something that will blow your mind totally. Did you know the U.S. is now the world's largest producer of crude oil? So, consequently, Middle Eastern oil imports to the U.S. hit their lowest share since the 1970s, accounting for less than 10% of the total U.S. imports. Why is this important to you? Well, as you know, there is a conflict between the United States, Israel, and we are trying to figure out, based on what we see from the mainstream media, why gas prices are going up. Why is this important for you? Every time that there's a conflict, doesn't matter who's in charge, gas prices go up. Now, in 2025, I just told you that the U.S. is the world's largest producer of crude oil because over the week, stock prices have gone up, and at the pump, they have gone up as well. Okay, so the U.S. federal government has limited direct control over gasoline prices, which are primarily driven by global crude oil supply and demand. Now, I want you to remember that I just said we get less than 10% of the oil from the Middle East, and that the government does not control what the states are charging for gas prices. They are determined by what the states are doing. Now, let me hit a perception that I get from the press. Market prices. Roughly 50 to 60% of prices at the pump is driven by the global cost of crude oil, which fluctuates based on international supply and demand. That is not true. From the perspective of you've got these forecasters who are applying this rule because we get less than 10%. Now, Europe, the European market and the Asian market, I am not duty bound to find out how much oil they're getting from the Middle East and how much they were getting from Iran. So, states, in case you didn't know, well, let me back up a second. The federal role. Since 1993, the federal government's direct impact is limited to a fixed excise tax of 18.4 cents per gallon for gasoline. That's been in effect since 1993, and that was the Congress in 1993 and a Democrat who was in the White House named Bill Clinton. All right, state variations. States set their own additional taxes and environmental fees, leading to significant price difference. Remember, half of the states are run by Democrats, and I'm going to give you some information a little later on to validate that. So, we're talking about environmental fees. Government regulation is based on that. And so the state can charge you for emissions testing and doing all those things. That's what they're talking about there. Now, So states range in prices from 9 cents in Alaska to 78 cents in California. That's the big difference. So with the price is changing in 2026 is based on the state changing it at some point, and I'm not accusing them of price gouging. You, the voter, have to figure out the timing of when the tax on gas goes up again. Now, while every state has a tax, the structure and amount per gallon vary significantly. So we already know that. So most states used a fixed cent per gallon rate, but many have adopted variable structures to keep pace with inflation and or construction costs. Inflation drives the price of gas, and I'm talking about specifically in Illinois. So if you compare the state price of gas with Missouri and Illinois, you can see that there is a 40 or 50 cents difference between just those two states. One is run by a Democrat and the other one is run by a Republican. Now, this isn't an opinion because I did the research and I'm going to tell you a little later on the rankings. Now, 26 states and DC use formulas that automatically adjust based on factors like inflation, fuel prices, or population. Okay, that's how they do it. This is how the states are doing it. Sales tax. Some states, including, guess who? Illinois, California, Indiana, Michigan, and New York, apply their general sales tax on top of specific motor vehicle excise taxes. Okay, on top of the excise tax. So remember, I said that the excise tax has been in effect since 1993 and is 18.4 cents. It hadn't changed since then. So we could have adjusted from that. And I live in Illinois and gas prices are high. And does the federal government have a role in that? No, they have that excise tax, right? But that's been in effect for everybody, no matter where you live at. And if you look at Missouri and Illinois, you can see that the states, the evidence leads us to believe and to assert that it's up to the state. And the state is run by either a Democrat, an independent, or a Republican. So you have to bring that together. And the reason that I'm saying it now is because this is an election year and the mainstream media is saying that gas prices were directly affected by the conflict in the Middle East, thus blaming the current Republican administration in the White House. Now, you had to figure out why they're doing that. Well, it comes back to affordability and wanting to take over the House of Representatives. Okay, so let's look at the federal government role now. Okay, what can they do to influence prices? All right, Current Energy Corporation, and this is recent. The U.S. has shifted its focus from being a major importer to a strategic partner in energy technology and regional security. That's big. They did that starting when the new administration came into the White House last year. Now, you've seen bits and pieces of it on with the mainstream media, but they don't dig into the details. The second thing that they did, and you're only going to find it here on this podcast. In March 2026, the U.S. pledged to provide political risk insurance and naval escorts for energy tankers in the Persian Gulf to ensure the free flow of energy. That is huge. So we are escorting the tankers from the Middle East and political risk insurance. I may have to look that up. I'm not quite sure what that means, if it's physical insurance or just a guarantee of help. Nuclear and minerals. The new formal agreements focus on civil nuclear energy and critical minerals rather than just crude oil. So they opened up the trade and they pivoted it just from crude oil, because when there's a conflict, and we know I'm 61, there's been conflicts over there the last 50 years, that our trading partners aren't as affected with the conflict based on oil alone. So the U.S. and Saudi signed a new minerals agreement. It was signed in late 2025. So that's what the actual federal government policy has been, to get away from just crude oil and look at critical minerals. But this isn't explained to anyone. They just say that, hey, well, Trump is trying to get all these business deals. We have to look at facts and details, and we have to leave the emotion of it out of it, that who's trying to impose their will on everyone. We have to get away from that. Also, there is an AI campus partnership. And for AI data centers, the reason that we're doing that is we want to be able to compete with the Middle East and Europe. And the Middle East, where we're talking about the OPEC people, the UAE, Kuwait, Dubai, all of them, they are focused on data centers. Why? Because that's going to bring in business to the country, and they're going to have millions of dollars of revenue with that. And the critical minerals. Critical minerals include the batteries for the electric cars. And we look at the supply side, and I'm only going to mention one thing: Strategic Petroleum Reserve. As you are aware, because this has come up before with previous presidents. So the Department of Energy can release crude oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve to increase domestic supply during emergencies or significant price spikes. And the administration has focused on refilling these reserves following previous drawdowns. That is significant because your elected representatives in Washington, why aren't they asking Wall Street why the price is going up based on what I just have put in this podcast? The mainstream media keeps saying that gas prices are high, and everyone is pointing the finger at each other. But the facts bear out that there is no reason, especially at this point, since the conflict's only 7 or 8 days old, why all of a sudden gas prices are going up. And if you watch the mainstream media, they'll show you several states they're going up. Now, remember, I told you this, that I was going to tell you the states. So, the states with the highest gas taxes. California is at 70 cents. Illinois, good old Illinois, we weigh in at 65. Washington State, 55. So we're talking about Pennsylvania, Michigan, Maryland, New Jersey, Rhode Island. All of those are blue states. Now, the only one that's a red state is Indiana. But I told you 10 of them. So out of 10, 9 are Democratic states. So we should question if the federal government is actually responsible for high gas prices. You decide based on what I just presented. This is Just Listen, hosted by George. Please subscribe. Please share the podcast with other people, especially in Illinois, because we need some help here. Have a great day, and later on today, I will do local Illinois politics.